So Jay can see the red dot in the upper corner. That indicates the meeting is being recorded. We have about 1 more minute. I'll do a last call for anybody who's interested in continuing education credits in chat pod number 3, which is just below the center of the screen. You will see a hot link to a Cornell.Qualtrics website, and if you click on that, it'll take you to it'll open a new window in your browser where you can record some your name and your credential, and that allows me to send documentation. So, John Sullivan, hello, Warren County. Okay, by all 3 of my clocks I have noon, so I'm going to flip us into the meeting space. Hold on to your chair. There we go. Now everybody should be able to see. Is there anybody that can't see the full PowerPoint screen? The way this new version of Adobe Connect is a little bit different. Sometimes people can't see the whole screen. If you can't, let me know and we'll try to make some readjustments. But it doesn't. Okay, Norm, what I'll do is I'll put that hot link for the CFE into this existing chat pod and move it up a bit. Okay, is that better? Let me do this. All right. So Norman, I'll put this after I introduce Jay. I'll put the CFE link into this chat pod so that people can grab a hold of that. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce Jay Boulanger. Jay works here at the Department of Natural Resources at Cornell University and is in charge of the deer hunting and deer hunter management program on Cornell lands in and around the university campus. So he has a great deal of experience in the topics that he's going to be talking about today, and I will stop with that, and I will turn the microphone airwaves over to Jay, and I'm going to mute my microphone and hover in the background. So Jay, welcome, and away you go.
Okay, thank you, Pete. Can everyone hear me okay? Probably just one yes would suffice on the chat out of the 56 people that are there. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar on deer management. As Pete introduced, my name is Jay Boulanger, and I'm an Extension Associate and Deer Program Coordinator at Cornell University. In general, I'm a wildlife biologist, but I'm interested in a lot of deer-related issues and all sorts of other human-wildlife conflicts, and I also teach a course on wildlife management at Cornell as well. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the use of controlled hunting and briefly some silvicultural practices to help regenerate forests. And my hope is that some of this information will be useful to you folks wanting to grow trees or who want to set up a controlled hunting cooperative. I'm going to proceed with the talk and answer questions at the very end, and I'll make sure we have about 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions. So feel free to type your questions as you go along, and I can go back and scroll through those later on. And if I don't get to all the questions, on the very last slide I'm going to have my email address and also a web link to our deer program for you. So I'll be happy to answer questions at a later date if we don't get to them today. Before we jump in, there we go. Before we jump in, I did want to recognize Cornell Cooperative Extension. The program today is brought to you by CCE, which is celebrating its centennial. For 100 years, CCE has been a trusted provider of research-based knowledge to the people of New York State and beyond. We have an overabundance of deer in many parts of New York and the Northeast, but it wasn't always that way. Deer were almost extirpated near the turn of the century due to the clearing of forests for agriculture and due to market hunting, unrestricted market hunting. And this almost decimated deer populations in the United States. But in the 1900s, thanks to wildlife management programs, we now have lots of deer. In fact, it's one of the greatest wildlife success stories. But unfortunately, in some areas, it's been too successful, and we see pictures like this on occasion. So this clearly demonstrates deer overabundance that we have in some areas. And this is a drastic example pictured here. But deer overabundance is relative, and it really depends on the area you're in. So in the Adirondacks, for example, you don't necessarily need to have 50 deer per square mile or 100 deer per square mile to have deer overabundance. In some places in the Adirondacks, it's very difficult to grow trees, um, even at 5 or 8 deer per square mile. When we have deer overabundance, we start to run into trouble. And with that overabundance, we see an increase in deer vehicle collisions. We see damage to agricultural crops and damage to people's ornamental plantings. And what we're going to focus on today, damage to forests. And abundance of black-legged ticks, the vector for Lyme disease, has also been associated with the size of deer populations. And deer, being a keystone species, also affects not only its own habitat, but the habitat of other species. And so when we have deer overabundance in forests, we also see a decrease in mid-canopy and ground nesting songbirds, like the ovenbird pictured here. Deer damage is so prevalent that it's been said that white-tailed deer may cause more damage than any other species of wildlife. And that quote comes from Dr. Kurt Vercauteren, who is a prominent wildlife damage management biologist in this country. So that's a very bold statement, but it is true in many areas of the U.S. and especially the Northeast. So the situation in New York and other parts of the Northeast is that our forests are maturing. And at some point, the second generation trees are going to be cut. And the question is, can we regenerate trees? So it seems like a simple concept. If we cut down trees, we want to grow more, but growing trees is not so simple in areas of deer overabundance. So the question is, can stands be successfully regenerated? In a recent study by the Nature Conservancy, they found that nearly 1/3 of New York State may not have sufficient regeneration to replace the forest canopy after a significant disturbance to the uppermost foliage layer. Now, that's incredible, nearly 1/3 of New York, if you think about that. And they found that a primary factor for this was deer browsing. The worst parts of the state are in the southeastern New York area and also the Adirondacks. And there are other factors too, such as invasive plants, poor timber management, changing weather patterns, air pollution, pests and diseases, and of course some of the typical factors as well, such as moisture and weather changes and things like that. But again, a primary factor for limiting forest regeneration was deer browse. And anyone can go to the Nature Conservancy's New York site to find this report. It's just called Forest Regeneration in New York. So the question is, how did we get here? Why are some of these areas in New York and the Northeast hit so hard? This picture, or this graph, shows the New York statewide deer harvest, and you can see that we've been harvesting in the deer hunting seasons hundreds of thousands of deer, and that the deer harvest has been relatively stable over the years from 1984 to 2007, with the exception of a bit of an increase there in the late 90s and the early 2000s. Well, the issue is that hunters aren't harvesting enough deer right now, and New York is currently putting together, or currently has out, a new draft management plan to address some of these issues. But essentially, we rely on the state of New York's hunting program to keep the deer numbers in check so that we can have biodiversity and the regeneration of trees for perpetuity. At Cornell University, we've worked on a technique, and there are three tenets to this technique. In a nutshell, this is really the take-home message of today's talk, and that's that successful hardwood regeneration in the Northeast is dependent on three interacting management components. The first is correct silvicultural treatments of the overstory, for example, shelter woodcuts or clear cuts. The second is control of understory competition, for example, herbicides and using cutting for competing plants, or even the use of goats. And finally, the control of deer herbivory, so the use of fencing or slash cover, and what I'm going to be spending most of today talking about, hunting. So I'm not a forester, I'm a wildlife biologist, but I've worked with some extension foresters at Cornell, and Gary Goff in Extension has given this talk on silvicultural practices. I'm just going to touch on these a little bit today, but he states that you can't just use one of these techniques or even two of these techniques for successful tree regeneration, but that you really need all three. And what we've demonstrated in some Cornell forested lands, that with all three we can get some regeneration back, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail later on. So our goal is to create conditions for successful regeneration and growth of seedlings beyond the reach of deer. And that reach of deer is at least 5 feet or higher. So we suggest that you be realistic about current advanced regeneration. For example, old saplings are not vigorous. You're really looking for new, young growth. With regeneration harvest, we're talking about aggressive and large scale, so seed tree, shelter wood, or clear cuts to help promote regeneration. Another technique would be leaving lots of slash to protect seedlings, and we've done that on some Cornell lands as well. This is cutting down some trees and leaving the bushy slash at the top of the tree on the ground. In general, deer are opportunists, and they tend to avoid those areas more so than they would the seedlings that are growing outside of the slash. And finally, you could use herbicides to control unwanted understory or competition. So these are just some techniques that can help one regrow trees. Now, all of this may not be a panacea depending on the density of deer you have in your particular neighborhood, but this is what's been used successfully in some areas of Cornell lands. To put things in perspective, I want to give you just a few deer browse factoids so you get an idea of what we're talking about when we're talking about deer browsing. Your typical white-tailed deer that we have out here in the east needs about 6 to 8 pounds of woody browse per day. Now this is during the winter months when they actually are feeding on browse. So at 600 seedlings per pound, that's about 4,200 seedlings per day, 1.5 million seedlings per year, and 1.25 tons per year. But again, thankfully, deer have access to other foods in the fall and the summertime. But if you take these facts and you just think about one deer in a woodlot, and in some of our woodlots here in the Finger Lakes, we can have easily 20, 25 deer on small parcels, as small as 5 acres. You really start getting the picture of how much damage they can cause during those winter months and with the browsing. This is a figure I wanted to show you from David D. Colesta. And this is just a theoretical figure or a graph to demonstrate what happens when you get a population of deer. They start to grow and they become overabundant to the point where they start to starve. So this is, again, theoretical over time. On the left side of the figure there, we have net productivity, and we have deer per square mile on the bottom. And don't take the numbers as gospel, because they're not. They're just there to demonstrate the concepts here. But as you start with just a couple of deer, their population will rise, and you can see as you get to about 7 deer per square mile, we start to lose preferred herb and seedling species, and songbird abundance declines. A little further up, at about 8 or 9 deer per square mile, we still have quality deer with larger racks and healthy body weights of about 150 pounds. And again, these can vary based on geographical location. Moving further up the curve, we start losing songbird species, the habitat declines, we start to lose a shrub layer and shrub species. And things just start getting worse. As we approach the apex, we start seeing smaller deer with smaller racks, and then we approach the top of the curve where there's an obvious browse line and browse-resistant saplings left, and things just go downhill from there. So that's the carrying capacity of deer, and this is the general trend of things that can occur and has occurred in different parts of the Northeast. And where we're located, in the Finger Lakes region at least, we're probably somewhere at the beginning of the curve, right around the 10 deer per square mile. Now, again, we don't want to talk about exact number of deer per square mile because at Cornell University lands, for example, we have upwards of 50 deer per square mile, yet we also still have quality deer with big racks and larger body sizes. I'd like to just run through a few slides to let you know when you're in trouble. So if you have a woodlot and you're examining your woodlot for deer browsing or damage, these are some of the obvious things that you can look for. Here we have what we call a broomed white ash, or a young ash that's completely stripped of small branches and leaves. You know you're in trouble when, after you cut trees, you have nothing else growing above 6 inches, or it's all being browsed down. You know you're in trouble when you have nothing but a monoculture of fern as your understory, with nothing else growing. And this is one of my favorite pictures. This shows a 4-acre strip clear cut in the Catskills that's 4 years old. And normally, without deer and with everything else in alignment, you wouldn't see just a bare ground here, but you would see lots and lots of young growth and saplings in this area. And you know you're in trouble when you have nothing but a beech brush thicket. Deer don't prefer beech, and so it tends to be a species that moves in and does fairly well in area that has deer overabundance. And lollipop white cedars. These are a common sight around the Finger Lakes. These are common ornamentals, and white cedar grows wild in some places. And you can see where the deer completely strip the bottoms of the cedar trees. And we have the 6-foot browse line. This is very common in our region here, and that's simply most of the foliage is eaten up to 6 feet, which is the comfort level for deer to stand up on their hind legs and feed on the leaves and understory. And in some parts around here, if you're on flat ground in a forest, you can actually get down on your haunches or your hands and knees and see through the forest 100 yards or more because there's simply nothing growing in the understory. And another difficulty we have, another reason for the abundance of deer, a couple things. One, posted lands. People are posting lands more. And we also have a lack of hunter recruitment. So not only do we have limited or more limited access than perhaps we used to for deer hunters to help control deer populations, we are also losing the younger hunters. So the average age of your typical hunter now keeps rising, and the kids and younger people are not coming into the hunting sport. Just a brief bit here on preferred foods. Unfortunately, people have a difficult time growing trees and ornamentals, lots of ornamentals, deer will eat lots and lots of different trees and plants, but they do have preferences, and they do prefer some of the same trees that we like to plant in our forested lands. Sugar maple, white ash, hemlock, birch and oak, basswood, pin cherries, and fir trees as well. And speaking of firs, for those folks that are interested in growing Christmas trees on their lots, deer also have a preference for the fir trees, such as the balsam fir and the Fraser fir. But they also are not as likely to eat the Scots Austrian or red pines or the white or Norway spruces, and rarely damaged or blue spruce. But that being said, it's difficult to prevent buck rubbing, and this is a behavior that occurs in bucks during the breeding season. They take their antlers and they rack them up against trees, and they really enjoy the scent of the aromatic trees like fir. And so this is a type of damage independent of feeding. And there are a number of different reasons or factors influence deer feeding pressure. And it helps describe why one forest owner might do okay in a deer-rich area, whereas their neighbor or an adjacent landowner might be having lots of deer problems. Deer population density is a factor, along with food and cover sources, travel corridors, alternative foods, and the list goes on and on. So there are a number of factors that influence deer feeding pressure that do explain why there are differences. So we generally don't see, a similarity in deer browse across large landscapes unless we're at extremely high levels of deer. So we've identified some of the problems of deer overabundance, and the question remains is how do you deal with it? What can you do? What are your deer management options? And the two main categories here are no population control versus population control. And under the former, one option is hands off, and this is something that some people practice, but in general, if damage is too great, it does not become an option for some. Damage control techniques can include the use of repellents and fencing. Repellents simply aren't very useful. In a woodlot, you would have to treat every single tree and it's just, or sapling, and it's just not practical and it's extremely expensive. Fencing, however, is a wonderful tool if one can afford it. And there's really no better way to keep deer out of a given area than by having a really sound 8 or 9 foot fence completely surrounding your property. Of course, the cons to this are that the fencing can be extremely expensive and it can also be an eyesore to some. And the cost alone will make it impractical for many, many people. Baiting has been proposed. This concept would be setting up a bait crop, outside of a woodlot or an area you wanted to protect in hopes of luring the deer away from that area. But there are two problems with this. One is you might be increasing the deer's fitness and you could end up with more deer than you started with. And two, feeding is just plain illegal in New York State. And that largely came about due to our chronic wasting disease that arrived here just a few years ago. And although we haven't seen chronic wasting disease in the state for a few years, the policy of no feeding will likely remain indefinitely. Under population control, we have lethal methods. Predator introduction has been proposed, but this evokes safety concerns by many stakeholders. The general idea is that we introduce or reintroduce mountain lions or wolves on the landscape to prey on deer. And while these animals do an excellent job at preying on deer, again, politically or socially, it might not be acceptable in our area, and especially not on or near suburban landscapes. Capture and kill and bait and shoot programs have been implemented in various parts of the Northeast. They're very effective and they can be cost effective as well compared to other techniques, but they're extremely controversial. And but these techniques have been done in large parks to protect forested lands and have been effective. Less expensive than that would be the traditional hunting or a controlled hunting program. Traditional hunting would just be allowing hunters on your property, and controlled hunting is what I'm going to spend most of the talk today on, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Non-lethal methods include habitat alteration, and an example of this would be planting those plants not very palatable to deer. So, for example, if you wanted to plant Christmas trees, you might prefer the blue spruce is just one example. But if you want to grow oaks and sugar maples, then that's, of course, simply not an option. Capture and relocation has been researched, but it's very expensive. It's translocating a problem elsewhere, and deer might not survive the process. And finally, we have, excuse me, we have the most recent experimental techniques, and those are transient and permanent fertility control. And by transient, we're talking about temporary fertility control, such as the use of immunocontraceptive vaccines. This is a temporary vaccine, and a booster is required, so it becomes very difficult to find the deer you boosted 1 year in subsequent years. Permanent population control includes sterilization. And this is surgical sterilization, and we are doing this on Cornell University lands on campus where there can't be any hunting, and we'll talk a little bit about that coming up. So in a nutshell, those are the options, and for many of these options, they're just simply not options for some people, and it demonstrates how difficult deer management can be in order to grow trees. But rather than using these techniques singly, we recommend an IPM, or an integrated pest management technique, where you use multiple techniques. So a population management program, such as a controlled hunting program, in conjunction with, for example, fencing in an area that's very sensitive, along with plant selection, might work more than just using them one or by themselves. It's clearly been demonstrated time and time again that if you protect an area from deer browse, you see changes very quickly. And this picture depicts on the left side of the picture an unprotected area where the deer are free to roam, and on the right side you have an area that's been blocked off, and you can see that the number of seedlings and saplings and young trees that are starting to grow in a short period of time. I believe this is just 2 or 3 years for this particular picture. So on Cornell University lands, again, we're using surgical sterilization, and I'm not going to talk about that too much, but if you look at the map, what's highlighted in blue is the core university campus area, and we simply can't have hunting there. Where we can have hunting, we do, and we've opened up just about every square foot we can to allow hunters to gain access to these properties. And we'll start giving you some of those details shortly. The core campus is about 1,100 acres in size, and that's where we're using the fertility control research in addition to some exclusion. We've fenced off the Mundy Wildflower Garden, for example, to protect that area from deer. And our goal is a 75% reduction in deer abundance and associated impacts within 5 years for the core campus. The currency by which we judge our programs is to figure out about how many deer we have in the area. And this is, excuse me, a very difficult task. And we do this with the use of digital infrared triggered cameras. And you can see by the pictures here, we're using cutting-back cameras, which is just a common infrared camera used by many hunters for recreational purposes, but they work very well for us as well. And you can see in the upper left-hand picture, we have a deer with a radio collar and yellow ear tags. And we have a number on both of those markers, so we can identify the deer every time it comes into a baited apple pile in front of the camera. On the upper right-hand corner, we have some unmarked deer that have come into our bait pile within the study area. And in the lower left-hand corner, we have a deer that's marked with a radio collar, an adult doe and her fawn, and also marked with ear tags, but we can't tell what the number is on that deer. So in any case, we can look at these proportions and come up with an estimate, a rough estimate of the deer on Cornell lands, on Cornell campus lands. And what we found since we started the program in late 2007, we probably started in 2008 at around 100 deer on campus, or above 52 deer per square kilometer, but we don't have a formal population estimate for that as of this time. But in 2009, we had about 92 deer, 52 deer per square kilometer. And then you can see over those 3 years, by the spring of 2011, we had 60 deer, or 35 deer per square kilometer. Now, 35 deer per square kilometer is still too many, we think, and we'd like to get it down to about 10 or 15 and see if we can make a difference. A note about our population estimation is that our confidence intervals, or these estimates, are actually very accurate. We're working within a relatively small area, and we have a pretty good idea of the number of deer and the marked deer that are around, so we're pretty confident with these numbers. Now, the deer get killed on campus mainly from 2 reasons. 1, deer vehicle accidents, and 2, our hunting program that's adjacent to the core campus area. And so we're really using both techniques in conjunction with each other to help reduce populations. But I'm just going to start focusing on the hunting program now and how we put that together. The hunting zone adjacent to core campus is about 4,000 acres, and it's non-contiguous land consisting of natural areas, agricultural fields, and woodlots. And on this land, we've implemented what's called an earn-a-buck program. And the concept of the earn-a-buck program is simple. A hunter has to harvest 2 female deer first before they qualify to take a buck. And this program was based on previous earn-a-buck programs that were implemented in Wisconsin, in New Jersey. And I saw earlier we have a participant from New Jersey in the audience, which is good. And based on the successes of those programs, we implemented earn-a-buck. You'll have to excuse me while I take a sip of water here. I'm actually recovering from a cold, and you're probably wondering how one can get a cold when we're in a heat wave like this in the middle of summer, but I just returned from Iceland and think I picked one up on the plane on the way back. So we work with New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and cooperate with them, and they give us DMAP permits. That stands for Deer Management Assistance Permits, and these are extra antlerless deer permits that we can distribute to our hunters who participate in our program. And these permits can be distributed in other cooperative or controlled hunting programs as well. So this is something that people can apply for if they're experiencing deer overabundance and associated impacts. Our program is open to the public. It didn't used to be, but that all changed during our first hunting season in 2008. Traditionally on Cornell lands, the hunting was allowed based on the individual land manager or farm manager or faculty or staff member who happened to have jurisdiction over particular pieces of Cornell property. And what we did is consolidated all of that, in this case under my management, and opened the program up to the public. And it's simply a first come, first serve, sign in and sign out hunting program, and we'll get into some of those details in a little bit. But our goal is to reduce deer abundance and associated impacts within 5 years. And the idea is that we want to continue deer hunting in the future, as deer hunting has been a tradition on Cornell lands for many decades. In fact, there may have been hunting back to the inception of Cornell in 1865. Cornell's first earn-a-buck program was implemented at the Arnott Teaching and Research Forest, which is just over 4,000 acres of contiguous, almost contiguous land in Cayuta, New York, about 13 or so miles south of the main Ithaca campus. And I wanted to show you this graph here just to demonstrate the increase in female deer that occurs once an Ernebuck program is implemented. On the bottom of the graph in the lower left-hand corner, we see the years 1997 and 1998, and you can see that the number of adult does and number of adult fawns is small compared to the implementation of the Ernebuck program in 1999. The number of adult does and fawns doubled or more than doubled for a number of years, but naturally the number of bucks went down, and that's to be expected because hunters have to come in and they have to harvest 2 female deer first. So that takes a little bit of work, and then we see a decline in the harvest. We had some pretty tough winters there in the early 2000s, and then it stabilized again. So the Ernebuck program is a way to reduce female deer, and the female deer is the driving force behind population reduction. Deer have a polygynous mating system, and so it's the females that you need to reduce, since one buck can impregnate many females. Now again, hunting has been a tradition on Cornell properties, so the hunting program has been far less controversial than, say, some of the bait and shoot or trap and kill programs that have been proposed in other parts of the Finger Lakes region, Cayuga Heights to name one. And we have a lot of flexibility. So if you're interested in starting a hunting co-op or using controlled hunting, you can limit the day, time of day, or location, and you can even limit the harvest, all within the regulations set forth by the New York State DEC. So you have normal hunting laws, rules, and regulations, and then within that, you can set up even more controls. We have 2 different types of hunting near campus. We have bow and firearm zones, as highlighted in orange on this map. And these are areas that are located further away from campus, or they're adjacent to sensitive areas. And then we have areas that are bow only for safety reasons, especially as we get close to Cornell campus. And in 2011, for the first time in New York State, crossbows are now allowed, and they can be used in the regular firearm season and the late archery / muzzleloader season. And we are allowing the use of crossbows during those seasons on Cornell University lands for this upcoming year. Each one of these areas on the map here, you can see there are a lot of alphanumeric codes on them, like F1, A11, A10, and so on and so forth. The A simply stands for archery, and F stands for firearms. The sign-in is limited, so it's a first-come, first-served system, and we only allow a certain number of people into these zones so as we can prevent overcrowding. This is just a picture of our deer check station. We do have a mandatory deer check, and we collect biological information from the deer, and it's just a retired livestock facility on Cornell campus lands located in the middle of our hunting zone. If one is interested in signing up for our hunting program, they have to first go through a police background check. And if they pass that, they are then awarded a CU hunting permit, a Cornell University hunting permit. Each fall I hold hunter orientation meetings. These are non-mandatory, as we have a website that also has the information and rules and regulations. But we usually get about 100 people that come to these meetings each fall. And we, again, have a sign-in, sign-out setup at the deer check station, and we collect biological data and report the deer seen. And I'll show you some of these forms here. This is our sign-in, sign-out form. It's pretty straightforward. A2 stands for the zone. It's written across the front. A hunter signs in with their name, and they write in their phone number, the time in and out, and the total time hunted, any comments, and whether or not they harvested a deer. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner we have the name of the zone again, and also the maximum number of hunters at any given time. So for this particular zone, the maximum is 8 hunters. This is the deer harvest report form. I don't need to go through all this, but this essentially captures the biological information, sex of the deer, the weight, information from the hunter, where they were hunting, and that sort of thing. And finally, we have the deer seen by category form. So this gives us a relative index of abundance above and beyond the actual harvest data. And we ask hunters to let us know what they saw in the field. And this is an anonymous system, and we have a lockbox at the deer check station. So in other words, if you're hunting in, say, zone A2, and you're seeing a number of large bucks as you're hunting over a period of time, you're probably not going to want to announce that to the rest of the 200 hunters. So the information gets placed into a lockbox. Upon deer harvest, hunters weigh the deer. That's just a picture of the scale we have at the deer check station at the bottom there. We ask hunters to remove the jaw so we can get accurate aging from the deer, and we have instructions on how to do that at the deer check station. And they, again, complete the harvest report form, take a picture of the deer, and put all the forms in the box. We have disposable cameras, flash cameras at the deer check station, so it's really up to the hunter to document the harvest of a female deer because we're not always there to staff the deer check station. We're there during the busy weekends, like opening weekends and holiday weekends and that sort of thing. But essentially, the program is designed so that hunters can help themselves and check in the deer themselves. And we have explicit instructions on the website and also at the hunter orientation meetings. This is a female deer, an adult doe I harvested in 2008, and we ask hunters to put the form behind the head so we can determine that the deer harvested is not a buck. Being a sensitive program that in some cases is close to suburban neighborhoods, we have to have a number of rules and regulations ourselves. So these aren't state rules, but these are Cornell University rules. Each hunter gets a parking permit, which they have to display on the dash of their vehicle so that Cornell University police won't ticket them when they're parked on the side of the road. Each hunter has to wear an earn-a-buck identification tag. And this is very useful because it allows hunters to self-police. And this has been a real pro to the Cornell Earn-a-Buck hunting program. Because these hunters have to go through all the work to harvest 2 female deer before they qualify to take a buck, we found that they tend not to tolerate people trespassing. And it's easy to spot someone trespassing because they don't have attached to the outside of their clothing our Earn-a-Buck ID tag. Although Blaze Orange is not necessary in the state of New York, it's not a law. We do require it during the firearms seasons for firearms hunters. Archery zones are closed to all other types of hunting, but in our firearms zones, we do allow hunters to go waterfowl or turkey hunting in other parts of the year if they've been approved for the deer hunting program. I've already discussed limiting the number of hunters per zone. We don't allow guest hunters, so if anyone's interested in hunting, they have to go through the application process, but we do allow one non-hunter to accompany a hunter. So if someone wants to bring their child or their spouse, they can go along so long as they're not carrying a weapon. We stress that hunters practice safety and good neighbor relations, and we restrict hunters from signing in until 2.5 hours before sunrise. And so this really gives everyone an equal playing field and to prevent people from signing in at 2 minutes after midnight. And that's something they could have done traditionally because our deer check station is open 24 hours. There are plenty of times where a hunter might take a shot at a deer and give it time to expire, and so they'll come back and track the deer at night, and then they have the opportunity to check it in the middle of the night if need be. We do allow tree stands, and we have a lot of tree stand regulations, but I'm not going to go over that for this talk. And we have an example of just one of our hunting maps for one of our hunting zones. We cooperate with New York State DEC not only in getting DMAP permits, but also they allow us to hunt on their properties at the Reynolds Game Farm close to Cornell campus. So this is the Reynolds Game Farm where they raise pheasants. in New York State. And the maps always have discharge regulations, where you can hunt, where you can't. The red shaded area on this map shows, for example, to the right-hand side in the middle of the page, a 500-foot discharge boundary, since there's someone's house there. And to further help hunters, we place no discharge signs in the woods so hunters know where they can shoot and where they can't. This is a particularly small firearms zone of 19 acres, and only one hunter is allowed in here at a time, simply because of the sensitivity of the location being near the Reynolds Game Farm. So just an example of the detail-oriented maps we have on our website that we give to hunters so we can keep hunters out of trouble. And speaking of trouble, running a deer program, we always have a little bit. Over the past 3 years on the Cornell campus program, we've had 19 cases of trespassing that we've responded to, or Cornell University Police has responded to. We've had 6 stolen tree stands. We've had a couple cases of illegal baiting, arrows found on private property, young bucks killed by mistake. This is where a deer was shot thinking that it was a doe, but they couldn't see the small antlers behind the deer. And thus far, we've banned 6 hunters permanently from the program, from the Ernebuck programs, based on their deeds. And finally, over the 3 years, we found 9 unclaimed shot deer, most of them archery deer. So this is a deer that was shot with an arrow, and then it expired elsewhere, and the deer was never found, only to be discovered by either A, another hunter, or B, a hiker on Cornell lands. Since Cornell lands are opened up to the general public, there's a lot of hikers and runners on these properties that are hunted. The deer on the top of the page here is not just an unclaimed deer, it's actually a poached deer. So we've had at least one poached deer. This is an adult buck, and someone had sawed the antlers off, and then they took the hindquarters for meat. So this is very clearly a violation, and we never found out who did it. So there are always going to be some issues when you start managing large numbers of hunters. These things do happen, but overall they've been minor in the grand scheme of the pros of the program and the smoothness of how the program has been run to date. Now, speaking of unclaimed shot deer, the picture in the lower right might seem random to you, but that wire-haired dachshund is a breed that's very well adept to blood tracking. And as part of our program, we have a volunteer blood tracker who donates a service to the program, and he responds to hunters' calls day or night and helps them retrieve their deer if they're unsure of the hit. And so that's been an asset to our program. Quickly, some harvest results mirroring the experience on the Arnott Forest. Once we implemented the program, we did have more female deer harvested through all years. The first year, where we had 69 deer harvested, that was our pilot season. We didn't have as many hunters. 2009 was the first real season, and we were surprised that it quickly planed off with the number of participants and the harvest itself. So again, just wanted to demonstrate the power of female harvest. And going back to that slide, we do again want to reduce the population by 50% over 5 years. We've really done nothing to date except stabilize it, and that could be because of the number of deer we have to date. And so we really just are going to monitor that over time. Well, this is really what people are interested in. Now, with an Ernebuck program, we're really interested in reducing the female deer population. But what I haven't talked about yet is the carrot that the hunters really enjoy about the program. The side effect of the program is that it's a type of quality deer program, in the sense that if you're focusing on female harvest, you do give bucks a chance to live longer and thus grow larger antlers in most cases. And so you end up with a healthier population of these so-called trophy class bucks, which many hunters are interested in. And these pictures show just a few of the types of bucks that were harvested in the last couple years. Just some quick data, we had 97 participants the first year, and that doubled in 2009, and we had slightly a few more in 2010. And this reflects people that have actually signed in. What we found is that many hunters will register for the program and never hunt. So we feel like many people view Cornell hunting or the Ernebuck hunting program as a backup plan, and then they never sign in. So in 2010, for example, we actually had 500 registrants, but only about 200 people actually hunted. Hunting is not, excuse me, is not a sure thing. The proportion of successful hunters on average in 2008 was 0.38, and then that was reduced to 0.25 and 0.27 in the last 2 years. So your chances, at least in the past couple years, have been in 1 in 4 that you would get a deer. And at the Arnott harvest, for the Arnott harvest results, we have some interesting information because while the campus program is just getting started, the Arnott program has been around for some time. What they found is that the buck-doe ratios decreased from about 1 buck per 7 females to 1 buck to 2 females to 1 buck to 3 females. So it really brought down that buck-doe ratio and stabilized things a bit. The number of deer seen per day, however, has decreased over time. Now, the Arnott Forest being a contiguous tract of wooded land might be a more difficult hunt than some of the fragmented landscapes we have in the core Cornell campus area. The proportion of successful hunters at the Arnott was 27%, but it's gone down to 13% for the last 2 years, and that counts for bucks and does. And the buck harvested here in this picture was taken just last year, and that's really an exception, but they are few and far between. So I want to leave some time for questions and finish up here. At the Arnott Forest, what they've demonstrated over time is that they are able to grow trees. And this shows a picture of an example of some slash that's left in the picture to promote regeneration. Here's a close-up of the slash. You can see how the seedlings are protected from deer browse. And we saw a promising start of some oaks and maples starting to grow and growing taller yet. And that's Pete Smallage there on the left side of the picture for those of you that don't know. And finally, success of growing seedlings over 5 feet tall. And finally, I want to talk to you about a new technique we're using at Cornell. This is still experimental at this point, but it's a really easy technique to look at browsing on your own forested property if you're interested. And it's what we call oak seedling or a sentinel seedling survey. And essentially what we do is we have a multitude of plots all over Cornell University, core campus and hunting lands, and also adjacent neighborhoods. And we put out red oak seedlings every spring. We plant them. We grow them in a greenhouse and then plant them. And then over the next few months, we look at the proportion of survival. And the general idea is that over the years, we hope to see a greater proportion of these red oaks surviving. So at the end of the summer, early fall, we'll pull the seedlings and then replant every spring. So we're starting with the same height of seedlings with about between 6 and 12 leaves. But as of right now, we're just providing a free meal for the deer since we have so many deer on campus. This is just one example at the Cornell University golf course where you can see survival. And the red line here drops off after about 90 days. There are no plants left, and half of them are gone by about 25 days. So just a technique there that could be helpful should it end up working. So in sum, I'm going to leave this web page up for you. It has my email and it has the website for the deer hunting program. So again, take-home message is that we talked about correct silvicultural treatments of the overstory, control of understory competition, and then the control of deer herbivory. We talked a little bit about fencing and spent most of our time talking about setting up a hunting program. With that, I thank you, and I will start scrolling through these questions here on the left side.
Great job, Jay. And yes, there are some questions. There are some questions you can scroll back to about, I think, 12:30. Looks like John Triana had one about the deer density estimates. As people are typing in questions, and please go ahead and start typing in questions, also note at the top of the screen there's a link to an exit survey. I would appreciate it if everyone would complete that exit survey. That's an important way for us to not only provide feedback to Jay, but also for us to document the impacts of this type of educational program. We're constantly being asked by college administration to justify what we're doing, and this is one good way to do that. So, Jay, I'll let you scroll back through the chat pod and start responding to those questions.
Certainly. And just to let folks know, I'm also willing to stay here after the 1 o'clock hour for a little bit, and so don't feel like I'm going to cut you off here right at 1 o'clock. So John had a question: how did you come up with your density estimates? You noted they were very accurate. Thank you for that question. The point estimate, the estimated number of deer, whether it be 92 deer, 82 deer, or 60 deer on campus, is very accurate. The density estimate is not. The density estimate is very rough, and I just simply used division and took the number of square kilometers that we have in our what we call the sterilization zone, and use that as a base. A more accurate way to do that would be to look at the home range information, which we do collect from the deer using radio telemetry, putting some buffers around there, and then giving us more a closer estimate of the true study zone, if you will, and get a density that way. So the densities are ballparks when I talk about 35 deer per square kilometer. But again, the point estimate is very accurate. It had very small confidence intervals. So for example, when we estimated that there were 60 deer on campus, on the high end of the confidence interval, I believe it was just 5 deer, and then it was 5 deer on the other side as well, so very close. Brian had a question: how much of that population reduction is due to mortality from surgical sterilization? Wouldn't euthanasia be cheaper and more effective at reducing the population on the core campus area? There has been no mortality whatsoever from the surgical sterilization. The surgical procedure itself is very safe, and in fact the deer get every bit as much care as a human being would get under any type of surgery. We bring it into the vet school hospital suite or surgical suite, and there's a team of anesthesiologists, vet resident surgeons, and so on and so forth, and they get 3 layers of stitches. So it's quite a process, and yes, it is expensive. It costs about $1,000 to sterilize each deer. And we've sterilized 82 deer so far on core campus, and we've got about 95% of all the deer on campus at this point. So we're in the maintenance phase of the program, where we're just trying to get the new immigrants that come in each year, and that's roughly about 6 deer based on what we see out on the field. Euthanasia would certainly be cheaper, and we get that all the time. If we're capturing deer and bringing them into surgery, why don't you just euthanize them? And whenever you start talking about killing deer in a way outside of normal hunting channels, it becomes extremely controversial, and the regulations at the vet hospital that prevent us from doing that. Okay, I'm going to scroll down here. Okay, Mia had a question. Oh, okay, John had a question: how do people check into each zone? I showed a picture of a sign-in sheet, and at the deer check station we have a separate sign-in sheet on a clipboard hanging on the wall for each independent zone. So if there's a place you want to hunt, you would just pick up the clipboard and sign into that zone for that day. And if it's already full, in other words, people signed in before you got there, you would simply have to sign into another area. But I would tell you that zones booking up, it does happen, especially on the busy weekends, but there's always some place to hunt. And in my opinion, the Cornell program goes a bit underhunted. And so we encourage our hunters to scout out multiple areas. So if a place is full, they can go somewhere else. But I would say that probably 90% of the time you can hunt where you want to. Mia had a question. What resources, i.e. staff, are required to administer the CU hunting program? We're operating on a shoestring budget, so it's really myself and an administrative person who takes care of the hunting applications, and of course the CU police who process the background checks. And I usually get a handful of volunteers who help at the check station each year simply because they like seeing the deer that come in, and they're really into the program. And I'd say that's a benefit of the program too, is that we have a core of about 40 or 50 hunters that are really into a quality deer management program, that are super enthusiastic and actually spend most of their time hunting on Cornell lands, even when they have opportunities elsewhere. So John had a question. So the check station is just self-service. It really is for the most part. I mean, program staff, myself, or maybe one other colleague will be there, or a technician will be there during the busy weekends to help out. But mostly it is self-service. How do you enforce these rules? That's a really good question. Now, at the Arnott Forest, when you're talking about a contiguous tract of land, it's pretty easy because access into the Arnott only occurs at two places, two gates, if you will, and sometimes just one. And so it's easy to see who's coming in and out of that area. But when you're talking about the Cornell lands, clearly they're very fragmented, and they're surrounded by suburban landscapes and lots of roads and many access points. So enforcement really boils down to hunters just being honest. Now, I know that might sound naive, but that's the best we can do. That said, we do have some regular patrols. We don't have people out there all the time, but I've gone out with Cornell University Police, especially during the opening weekend of firearms season, and we check hunters. We, make sure they have a CU identification on their person, and most of the time we're happy with just that. If they have, because they have this permit on the outside of their clothing, that's a quick check, and then we don't have to get right in their face and then potentially upset one of their hunts. John Sullivan asked how many hunters register for the program. Last year we had 500, but just under 200 actually signed in to hunt. And this is on the core campus area. And of those hunters, I would say we have about 60 regulars, 60 or 70 regulars. At the Arnott Forest, that program over the past few years has been run by Gary Goff, and I can't think of how many hunters have registered for that program, but I think he told me it was around 300 a year or two.
I think that sounds right, Jay.
Okay. And then of those people that actually register, I would imagine that based on my conversations with Gary, that the number of people who actually sign in is somewhere between 30 and 40%. Let's see. Brian Hawthorne has a question. Actually, it looks like an FYI. Says here that there is, on a history of deer hunting in the area, there's a bulletin of the Cornell University, apparently an older one maybe, that there is a quote from someone saying that every year in the vicinity of Cayuga, more than 1,000 deer are killed. I would say in the vicinity of Cayuga, I don't know if he means Cayuga Street, or that's probably a bit high, but if it's Cayuga County, that's certainly believable. Liz Jackson is interested in a copy of the tree stand regulations. Liz, if on that last page up there you have a link to the deer hunting website, and you can get right on that homepage, if you just scroll down, you'll see all the information on the rules and regulations, and along with the tree stand regulations. John Triana asks, how long has this hunt gone on? It's started in 1999 at the Arnott Forest. The program that I've been running on campus, the first deer season was 2008, so it's still very much a young program. And he asked, the previous slide said it started in 2008, but those maple seedlings looked older than that. Yes, I used examples of pictures of seedlings in different areas, and I got the slides from Gary Goff. The picture of the growing maple seedlings and saplings. At least one of the pictures came from the Arnott Forest, but others have come from Pennsylvania. Says here, Pete said the Arnott started in 2000. Yes, that's right. Thanks for correcting me. I showed a graph earlier that the where we had 1998 and 1999 as starting dates when looking at the comparison of deer harvested. Karen Gardner asked how many deer per square kilometer at the Arnott Forest, and I don't know what that is. And I'm not, Pete, do you know if Gary has tried a formal study or an estimate or attempt?
We did the it's the method that Dave D. Koleska recommends, kind of the pellet count bow tie thing in the late 90s, and we came up with around 33 deer per square mile. And that was, to my knowledge, that was the last time we did any really serious effort at estimating deer. Okay. But just casually, we've, just in the decades since we started Ernebuck, we have areas now where we can go in and sugar maple seedlings are above my head, in areas, in places that 5 or 6 years ago they were knee high. So there's anecdotal evidence that we're having an impact on the impact that deer have on the tree seedlings.
Okay, thank you. John Triana asks, did you do regeneration plots for before and after comparisons? There's not much for before, because before it was pretty clear that not much was growing. And so the Ernebuck thing came around almost in a state of emergency to help, along with the other techniques, to regenerate trees at the Arnott Forest. Kelly asks, how do you see this experiment being usefully extended to other overpopulated areas? The university campus is a very controlled site, whereas most other natural areas are not. That's a great question. Like I mentioned earlier, you can take this type of program and create your own cooperative and work with New York State DEC to set up a similar program. But it requires you to work with your adjacent landowners to do it. Chances are most landowners around here, some might, but most, I would venture, do not own 2 or 3 or 4,000 acres of land. But if you talk to your neighbors, and if your neighbors are avid deer hunters, or if they're just, if not deer hunters, but are interested in simply regrowing trees, then they might open their lands up to hunting. And I know that there's a pool of many, many hunters always looking for new places to hunt. And you could exercise some of these Ernebuck controls for that hunt and help in that way. Bear with me here. I need to scroll up again. Patrick McGlue writes, New York Citizens Task Force method of setting deer harvest goals has helped raise awareness among various stakeholders, but I suspect end results will not really help forest regeneration to rebound. That is, target population level. Sorry, it looks like as people are entering comments, the comment box continues to scroll up, so I have to catch up here. That is, target population levels are still too high. Thoughts on a better way to set harvest goals? Need to change many opinions to be successful. Well, Patrick, for your question, I would certainly direct you to the state's current deer management plan. It's a draft management plan that was just published a couple of weeks ago, 2.5, 3 weeks ago. And they're taking comments up until July 28th of this month. And in that, I think they have some very positive changes to help forest regeneration. I mean, that's a real focus of New York State DEC now. They understand that we're facing a very serious problem to the biodiversity in New York and tree regeneration. And it's not a terribly long document. It's right on their webpage, and check out some of their proposed means to help reduce deer numbers. And just to give you one quick example that I can recall off the top of my head, they're talking about issuing antlerless deer permits in troubled areas. And although they don't spell it out, one potential way of doing that would be increasing the number of antlerless permits in a spot or a problem area. So example, maybe they would say Tompkins County, or maybe even the greater Ithaca area is a problem area. So for that, they will allocate more antlerless permits than they have in the past. So if some of these new rules and regulations go through, that could be very promising. In general, for the issue of sterilization as a means of control, who would pay for this? Well, this is a question from Melanie, and it is very expensive, and it's only scientific research at this point. And that technique, if successful, is really only for wealthy communities, could be gated communities, wealthy communities, government installations, universities, and that sort of thing, because it is really expensive. That said, myself and other colleagues in different parts of the country are researching different ways to bring the cost of sterilization down. Now, here at Cornell, we have access to the vet hospital, but in one experiment out in Missouri, they're using a retired ambulance as a mobile surgical unit with a retired vet surgeon. And so that's a way to cut down on costs. So really, sterilization is not something for the general public. It's just not, it's just out of the means. Lewis Ward asks, what McDaniel's Nut Grove small game gun hunting? There is no hunting at all at the McDaniel's Nut Grove. There's hunting close to that area, but because that's close to campus and the other side of the recreational trail, there has been no hunting there, and probably will not be. Let's see, Joe Triana asks, our hunt has a doe incentive, take a doe and get passed through the next year's lottery. We found abuses by some hunters if we didn't have a check station. There are always some folks trying to play the game inappropriately. Well, John, I agree with you there. I feel like in some cases, unfortunately, some hunters, if you give them an inch, will take a mile. And there certainly are loopholes in our program where people could get away with, getting buck eligible. I think in one simple example would be someone harvesting a couple of does elsewhere off of Cornell property and simply driving them to the check station after they had signed in that morning and just say they got them on Cornell property. We hope that doesn't happen too often, and I can also tell you that we have a really great core of about 30 hunters that are really strong-willed men and women that are able to do some policing on their own and turn in some of these violations. Most of our violations come from the actual hunters themselves, so that's been a good part of our program. Okay, let's see. People are saying thank you. Peter asks, reaction to hunting from the general public. Good, bad, indifferent, protests? That's a great question, and that was my fear when we first implemented the Earn-a-Buck program. In the end, we're essentially harvesting a lot more deer than has been occurring over the years, but we have not even been a blip on the radar of animal rights folks or animal welfareists. And that's been a relief to all of us, but I also think it's because we have programs that are far, far more controversial than ours right next door. In Cayuga Heights, for example, where they're proposing sterilization in addition to lethal control, that's been very controversial, and it's been in our local newspapers almost on a weekly basis for a few years at this point. And to answer your question, there really hasn't been any negative comments. However, and I'll say one other thing. We did have some problems when we first set up the program, but it wasn't from animal welfare. Surprisingly, it was from a small minority of the hunters themselves. And this came from the hunters, the few select hunters that had permission to hunt these lands for decades. So again, if you recall, the program wasn't opened up to the general public. It was just open to the select few who were able to get permission earlier on and keep that permission. And so they didn't like the idea of Cornell lands being opened up to the public. And so there was a little bit of fallout from that, but it was really not bad at all. It was about a half a dozen hunters who complained about that. Overwhelmingly, I've had great remarks on the Ernebuck program, and for the large bulk of folks involved with the program, they've been seeing the large bucks we've had on campus for many years, and now for the first time they were able to gain access to these deer. And so I get many thank yous and accolades for the program and how smoothly it's been run. And I can never get enough of those comments, but that's been very rewarding. Okay, just scrolling through. MJ Wilson is asking if the presentation is available for download. Will you just explain to folks how that works?
Yes, we've recorded this webinar, so as soon as in theory it's available instantly to me as soon as I turn the recording off, and then I can send the link to my administrative assistant, who can upload that link so that anybody can watch the recorded version at any time. And at the very bottom of that chat pod, you'll see where I've offered that if you go to my forestconnect.info website and page through the webinar page, you will get to you'll see a link where it says archived and scheduled webinars, something like that, and so there you'll be able to grab those links.
Thank you, Pete, and also thank you, Pete, for putting those links up, both the Cornell deer hunting link right here in the comments and also the link to the DEC draft plan. Let's see. MJ Wilson, welcome MJ. I remember you from extension talk I gave here a while back. MJ writes, in my area of southwestern Westchester, there is a lot of people looking for immunocontraception as the answer. Is there any comments you can offer on the effectiveness and viability of this approach? I would say that we're a ways off from immunocontraception being successful unless we're talking about very small populations of deer in a closed environment. That means a gated community or deer that are basically contained, because the problem is there is a vaccine out there called Gonacon, but it's a single shot vaccine. And the efficacy of that vaccine was 88% after year 1 in preventing pregnancies, and then 40%, 47% during year 2. So it's not 100% successful, and it can be issued as a booster shot, but again, you get into the issue of how do you capture that same deer in later years. So I think there's a movement now of people moving towards surgical sterilization, because you get the deer in hand once, you surgically sterilize it, and then release the deer. And that, although the immunocontraception might be cheaper up front, in the long run, it could be more expensive if you have to give it the deer reboosters. Patrick McLew writes, temporary return to market hunting? Question mark, and tongue-in-cheek, of course. Patrick brings up a good point, and it's really interesting. And all joking aside, I will tell you that there are wildlife biologist professors across the country that are actually starting to have this conversation. We have this overabundance, we have this resource, and if hunters are not going to be able to do it in the future, if lands continue to get posted, if we get fewer and fewer hunters, then something certainly will have to be done. And of course, it would take a lot of work and a lot of federal regulation to make something like that happen. And it's staggering and boggles the mind to think of how something like that could be implemented. It would certainly raise a lot of feathers, to put it mildly. But I just wanted to let you know that that is something people are actually starting to talk about. Okay, it looks like I've gotten through all the question. Okay, MJ has a question here. She writes, the immunocontraceptive that is most talked about is PZP. I'm unfamiliar as to whether or not PZP can still be used. It can be used and has been used experimentally, but as of right now, the EPA only has one federally licensed immunocontraceptive vaccine, and that's the Gonacon vaccine that I spoke about. So I don't know about PZP. I don't know if that is something that can be used. It probably could be used, but if it was, it would have to occur with a university under the guidance of research, formal research. Lewis Ward asks, great presentation. Have you presented to Tompkins County Sportsman Federation and others in New York State Conservation Council? I have presented to the Tompkins County Sportsman Federation, and I was speaking to some conservation officers about this last fall, and I imagine I'll be speaking to the Sportsman Federation again coming up late in the summer, early fall as we get closer to hunting season. I have not spoken to the New York State Conservation Council, but that's a good idea, and I would certainly do it if invited. And I appreciate everyone's time. Are there any last-minute questions before we sign off?
Jay, I want to take this chance to thank you. This was a great presentation. Jay incidentally gave this presentation to the department a few months ago, and I was not able to observe it. And so I thought, well, this will be a great chance. I can watch it and get Jay as a webinar speaker at the same time. So this has worked out really well. This is a huge interest for anybody that's paying attention to what's happening in our forests, and hunting and the management of hunters is almost a new science unto itself. So I want to thank Jay for the effort that he's put into this, and Gary Goff, I know, has worked with Jay in providing some of the slides, and Gary's efforts at the Arnott Forest and managing the Ernebuck program there. So thank you all. And if you haven't clicked on that link at the top for the exit survey, please do so that we can capture your thoughts on this. And thank you again, Jay, and we'll be back live tonight at 7 p.m. or a little before.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Hi, Jay. We can talk by microphone. That's fine.
Oh, okay, great. I just wanted to say thank you. That was a great first webinar for me. And also just wanted to let you know, too, that the content of this webinar was, I guess, yeah, probably quite a bit different than what I actually presented at the seminar, because I made it. I just want to let you know that it's a little less scientific. I had, more details with the the numbers of deer and things like that. But really, you got the gist of it in this talk.
Sure. Well, it's neat to see the way it's playing out on the Cornell lands. That's I'm glad that it's successful, and boy, the pictures that you have of those people with the big bucks, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Um, that ought to attract attention if nothing else does.
That's what I think as well. Well, great. Well, thank you again.
So,
I appreciate it.
yeah. Yes, sure. So I'll be back live about 6:40 or 6:45, and if you want to, come back sometime in there, we'll do another sound check. And you're gonna be on campus tonight,
I am,
right?
yeah. I'm at my house now without AC, and it's really starting to heat up. So I'm probably going to get into some air conditioning late afternoon or right after an early dinner. So I'll be online on campus at my office certainly by 6:45.
Okay. All right. All right, and I'll be just down the hallway, so I'm on campus tonight as well.
Okay, great. And there's nothing else I need to do except bring my headphones because my talk's already loaded on the site. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yes.
Great.
So you're all set. Just